Interrupt our regularly scheduled program to bring you an NBC News Report. Grenada invasion, late report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News in New York, and here is the latest situation as we now know it on the island of Grenada, which is a tiny island, as you know, in the southern Caribbean. It has been invaded by a multinational force, as it's being described. The bulk of that force, about 1,800 American troops, that includes Marines and apparently airborne troops as well, and about 300 troops from some islands around Grenada. They were sent there by President Reagan from Barbados early this morning, he says, at the request of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Those are the island nations around Grenada. Grenada is an island country that is now in the control of a Marxist military council after its Marxist prime minister was executed in a military coup just last week. There are about 1,000 American medical students on the island. The president said he was sending the troops in there to protect those students. But the chancellor of the medical school said that they were all right, and if there is any loss of life, the blame will be President Reagan's. At this time, we don't know if there have been any casualties. There have been reports of casualties, however, both from the Pentagon and from Cuba. Cuba is now saying that its construction workers at a big airport, about 9,000-foot runway at the southern tip of the island, fought, in the words of Cuba, heroically against what were described as Yankee invaders, and apparently several of the Cubans were killed. Chris Wallace is standing by at the White House right now, where President Reagan has been talking about casualties too, but apparently, Chris, he has not assigned any number to that.
No, and he hasn't explicitly said that they are U.S. casualties. Just a few moments ago, Tom, the president was meeting in the Oval Office with a foreign leader. Reporters were ushered in, and one of the reporters asked about casualties, and the president said, and I quote, "I know there are casualties, but I don't have any official report right now." We assume he was talking about U.S. casualties, but he didn't say so, so it's simply an assumption on our part. Earlier today, shortly after 9 Eastern Time, the president came into the briefing room to announce the U.S. action against Grenada, and he also explained the reasons for it. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
We have taken this decisive action for 3 reasons. First, and of overriding importance, to protect innocent lives, including up to 1,000 Americans whose personal safety is, of course, my paramount concern. Second, to forestall further chaos. And third, to assist in the restoration of conditions of law and order and of governmental institutions to the island of Grenada, where a brutal group of leftist thugs violently seized power, killing the prime minister, 3 cabinet members, 2 labor leaders, and other civilians, including children.
After the president spoke, senior U.S. officials gave us a briefing on just what has been going on in Grenada today, and let's run through that with this U.S. government map. It started about 5 a.m. when apparently 400 to 500 Marines were landed by helicopter at this airport in the northeastern part of the country at Pearls Airport. They secured that airport, according to U.S. officials. We are then told that between 700 and 1,000 Army airborne troops landed or parachuted into the Point Salinas International Airport, and that they have secured that airport and are now trying to protect Americans in the area and filter up here to the main population center in St. George's. We are told that there was initially some anti-aircraft fire that has been suppressed. There is still some small arms fire on the ground, and they are dealing with that. That's the latest here from the White House, Tom.
Thank you very much, Chris Wallace. And we have now at the Pentagon, Jack Reynolds, who has just emerged from a briefing, I believe. Jack, what have you learned?
Tom, that briefing is still going on. The Pentagon has been very scarce with details this morning about exactly what is going on, but the briefing is continuing. It's expected to go on for at least another half hour. Most of the details that became available here through unofficial channels during the course of the morning substantiated what Chris has outlined on the map. The one question that remains unresolved and of great concern here is casualties, and the Pentagon simply refuses to give us any information whatsoever on that. However, there is a U.S. medical facility in the area at Roosevelt Roads in Puerto Rico, and it's expected that whatever casualties there are will be sent in there rather quickly.
Congressional leaders are saying that the president intends to keep the troops there about 5 to 7 days. He wants to get in, accomplish the mission, and get out quickly. Is that what you're hearing at the Pentagon as well, Jack?
Yes, we are, Tom. And one of the things that was said here, one of the questions that I asked here this morning was, won't this stretch the Marines a bit thin? The force in Beirut was due to be replaced, rotated by the force which is now otherwise occupied on Grenada. There are other areas around where U.S. troops are committed. The answer I got was that people here do not expect the Marines to be tied down very long, and if in fact there are other units that could go in to replace them.
All right, thanks very much, Jack Reynolds at the Pentagon. By the way, those troops who are participating in this invasion of Grenada originally were headed for Lebanon, where they were to be replacement troops. And then, of course, we've had the situation in Lebanon on Sunday with the explosion that killed more than 200 American Marines. All of this activity in the Caribbean is being monitored by American journalists on the island of Barbados, and it was from there that the invasion was launched. We have standing by now in Barbados, Dennis Murphy, who has been following all of this very carefully. Dennis?
Tom, I'm at the Barbados airport, where a lot of the air operations have been coordinated out of. There were as many as 10 U.S. large military transport aircraft here of the C-130, C-140 class. About half of those have departed in the last 15 minutes. We don't know where they're headed, though. We understand that the Cuban-built 9,000-foot runway on Grenada is open, and that apparently is where these airplanes are headed. We have reports from Caribbean news organizations that that's where the planes are headed. Reports coming in from the island monitored here on local broadcasts are that the Cubans put up the heaviest resistance on the island. There are reports coming here, unconfirmed, that 3 Cubans were killed and 21 were captured in the assault. The forces, the multinational, are under the command of the Jamaican Defense Forces, who have the largest standing army of the Caribbean islands here. Fort Rupert, the central fort in Grenada with the garrison, came under mortar fire this morning, we understand from reports. But as Jack Reynolds said, the reports coming in here are sketchy as well, Tom. People are following this with great interest. Here at the airport, there are hundreds of Barbadians standing on the observation deck with radios looking out at the tarmac where the American military aircraft are poised.
Dennis, there's also a naval task force involved in all of this as well, isn't there? It includes the aircraft carrier, the Independence. And what did you say? A British couple that had come off Grenada last night indicated that they saw the lights of that task force just offshore? Dennis Murphy, can you hear me? Well, I gather he cannot, but at any rate, in an earlier report, Dennis Murphy did tell us that a British couple coming off the island of Grenada last night indicated that they did see the lights of a naval task force off the island, and the Grenadians on the island thought that an invasion may be imminent. And according to the British couple, that caused great joy on that island, which has just a population of about 100,000 people. Incidentally, it is a very small place, only about 21 miles by 12 miles altogether. It has been ruled by people very close to Cuba for about 4 years now. And last week, the Marxist Prime Minister of Grenada, Maurice Bishop, a relatively popular figure on the island, was killed in a military coup by Marxist hardliners. And even Fidel Castro of Cuba was moved to express great outrage over the killing of Maurice Bishop. Nonetheless, the Cuban construction workers continued to work on that 9,000-foot runway at the southern tip of the island. That is a runway that President Reagan has pointed out in the past as a potential threat to the United States because, he says, it could be used for Soviet military planes. We have been hearing as well from some American medical students who are on the island of Grenada. There is a medical school there, St. George's, and we have now this report from one of them. His name is Mark Baratella. He's from Ridgefield, New Jersey, and he's been talking on his ham radio. Let's hear what he had to say about the situation.
Report just approximately 2-3 minutes ago. 2 Cobra gunships passed over, U.S. Cobra gunships passed over the campus here, heading towards St. George. Over.
Roger. 2 U.S. Air Force gunships. Are you talking about helicopter gunships? Over.
That is correct.
Roger. Heading for St. George's. I got it. Over.
Could we get an overall set?
Mark, is there any other activity going on in or around the campus? Over.
Overall, it's been pretty quiet. Some sporadic sniper fire here and there. Nothing big in the past few minutes to a half hour. Okay, hold on 1 second.
Roger. KC-2PK standing by. Kindly, everyone, keep the frequency clear till we have the status report completed. Over.
Okay, be advised that there, as the gunships passed over, there were quite a bit
That was Mark Baratella, who's a medical student at the St. George's Medical School, and that is located, by the way, near that 9,000-foot runway where apparently the heaviest fighting did take place. Cuba is now confirming that some of its construction workers, as they're called, did take casualties as they engaged in apparently a heavy fight with some airborne troopers from the United States who landed there today as well. Congress at this time, for the most part, holding fire on President Reagan. Tip O'Neill said, "It is no time for the press of America or we in public life to criticize our country when our troops are being committed." 5 congressional leaders were briefed on all of this last night before the invasion took place. We'll have further details as they become available. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News, New York.
This has been an NBC...
A regularly scheduled program to bring you an NBC News Report. Grenada Invasion Late Report. Here is NBC News correspondent Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon. Continuing our coverage now of the military invasion of the island of Grenada, where about 1,800 American troops are involved. We have late word from the Pentagon that there is confirmation that those American troops, Marines and Rangers, those are airborne forces, that they did engage some Cuban troops or construction workers, as they're identified, as well during the course of this invasion, most likely at the southern end of the island where a 9,000-foot runway was being constructed by the Cubans. Cuba earlier said that its construction workers, as they continued to identify them, fought heroically against powerful American forces. We did have word earlier as well that 3 Cubans were killed, a number were captured. Now a source at the White House is saying that 30 Soviet advisors and up to 600 Cubans have been secured, in the words of the White House, and that they will be transported out of Grenada. The Cubans on a Cuban ship, how they'll dispose of the Soviets, we're not sure. Chris Wallace has just completed a White House press briefing on all of this. Let's hear what he has to say. Chris, what's the latest there?
Tom, an administration official just told me that the fighting continues in Grenada, that U.S. forces have achieved a number of their objectives, but that a few remain. As for the number of U.S. casualties, all they'll say here at the White House and at the Pentagon is that U.S. casualties are minimal. They also say that a U.S. helicopter has been downed, but they won't say whether it was shot down or whether it was simply disabled by some electrical malfunction. In all, they're now talking about 1,900 U.S. troops on the ground in Grenada, about 400 to 500 Marines up in the northern part of the country, around the Pearls Airport, and then another, around 1,000 airborne Army troops down in the south around the big international airport with that 9,000-foot runway, and that's where they apparently have engaged those Cubans. There's also a growing controversy about the motivation for the U.S. action. We were told early in the day that one of the main reasons was because of fear for the safety of those 1,000 Americans on the island, many of them, about 600 of them, medical students. But in answer to questions, Larry Speake said there had been no specific threats against the Americans, no incidents of any abuse of the Americans. There was simply a general 24-hour curfew with orders to shoot to kill anyone who broke that, and that was against all people on the island, not against the Americans. So I think we are already beginning to see the beginnings of a controversy as to just what the Americans are doing in Grenada. One other point I'd like to make, and that is that we were told that the President will give Congress official notification of the U.S. role in Grenada under the War Powers Act within the next 24 hours, or rather 48 hours. That's official notification. During the last 24 hours, the President has briefed congressmen last night in the residence and this morning in the Cabinet room on the west wing of the White House. Tom?
Thank you very much. Chris Wallace at the White House. The President actually outlined 3 reasons for this invasion. He said, we want to protect those innocent lives, referring to the medical students. Also want to forestall further chaos on the island, where a bloody Marxist coup took place last week against the Marxist Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, and we want to restore law and order and democracy. John Dancy now on the Hill. Is that washing with members of Congress, John?
Well, with some of them, of course, it is, Tom. It's splitting pretty much along ideological lines here. Conservatives support the president. Trent Lott, for example, over in the House said, where in the world, other than the shores of our own country, do we have a vital interest anymore? But among some of the liberals here, there's a real question. Moynihan of New York flatly saying that this amounted to an act of war as far as he was concerned, Tom.
Thank you very much, John Dancy on Capitol Hill. We'll have additional details at 3 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon when Secretary of State Schultz is expected to give a lengthy briefing. And then, of course, tonight on NBC's Nightly News.
You're watching NBC, where the viewing is first class.
You've got to be there.